Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria and welcome to our end-of-year edition of Counting the Cost, looking back on some of the stories we covered in 2015. It has been a year dominated by many things: ISIL, the war in Syria, the Chinese economic slowdown, of course the impact of the refugee crisis in Europe as well. But we started the year with something different for us, a live panel discussion in front of an interactive audience at the Women in Energy Forum here in Doha. We partnered up with Gulf Intelligence to discuss why so many women, particularly here in the Gulf, are studying to enter the energy sector, but just aren't finding the jobs. Here's just a short part of our discussion. Now the audience may not know this, but Marie-José is the first female chair of the World Energy Council in its 93-year history.
That's right.
Have you got any thoughts on why that is? Why a woman didn't ascend to a position like that sooner? Is it you? Are you that good? I'm sure she is, but...
Actually, I was the first woman to sit on their board. So it's as in many energy organizations, it's not necessarily welcoming for women. And we really have to make our way through to be not only competent, but to persist in our determination to make a difference and to pave the way for the next ones.
Give me some examples of what's happening at Maersk Qatar to get women involved. Do you have an active program to recruit women? Because if they're all going to university and studying, it's a shame that they're not getting into the jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the statistics within the Middle East, only 3% of the oil and gas sector as a whole is represented by females, which is actually quite shocking when you think this is something that we've been on a journey and thinking about for the last 15 years at least. We talked about quotas, and I think that's an ongoing debate on whether we should set quotas in the industry. And there are pros and cons to both. But I think it is a good way to get an aggressive approach to these things and to push the right behaviors, because we are naturally driven by targets. Within Maersk Oil Qatar, we operate an equal opportunity employer practice, of course, but we also proactively go and engage with females very early at universities, within schools, to track them and bring them into the STEM, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics.
In my country, it is not difficult to get in the job. Since the woman, she graduates with high degree in petroleum energy or in petroleum engineering. The question is how long she is going, how long she will stay in the job since she is in. And also, is she is going to be upgraded? Is she is going to get higher position than that? This is the challenge that she is facing. Yes, she got the job, but.
Yeah, it was a great discussion that day, and especially nice to have a live audience. Not that we don't appreciate you watching each week on television, of course. So now to some of the topics we explored in 2015, and as it has been for many years, debt was a central topic. But it's kind of shocking to find out that global debt levels are actually worse now than they were before the financial crisis 8 years ago, remembering it was a financial crisis triggered by debt. Susan Lund was our guest on this. She's from the McKinsey Global Institute in Washington, D.C., which had completed some research on global debt levels. You know, Susan, we had a financial crisis about, 7 or 8 years ago, you might remember that. And it was so big. We had a Greek crisis after that. We had a Eurozone crisis, all these things that happened off the back. And here we are all these years down the track, and there is more debt in the world than there was then. Help me out with this one. Is this just how the financial system works, or is something wrong here?
Well, the world does appear to be addicted to debt. Total global debt has increased by $57 trillion since 2008. Now, of course, the people that got into trouble back in 2008 have indeed reduced debt. So U.S. households, for instance, have reduced their debt quite substantially. And so have households in Ireland, Spain, the United Kingdom, and a few other countries in the world. But the countries that were not at the heart of the crisis have continued to borrow. So this would include governments, as you pointed out, in Europe, in Japan, in the United States, households across Northern Europe and even in emerging markets, and borrowing in China has quadrupled.
It's hard to understand the theory. Here we are, this many years after a financial crisis that was caused by easy credit, by the subprime mortgages in the United States. And that easy credit, as you've said, is still there. It's not making sense.
Well, it's interesting. So there are a couple different factors at play. Let's take a look at China. So China has been growing at 10% every year for the last 20 years. A lot of that was driven by investment. The Chinese households also save a tremendous amount. Somewhere around 30% of their income goes directly into bank deposits. So banks have a lot of liquidity, and they have gone on a lending spree. They have lent to households, they've lent to Chinese companies, they've lent to government entities to build infrastructure. So a big part of the increase in global debt story is actually China. It alone accounts for almost half of the increase in debt globally since 2008. And that's because they've got a lot of savings and banks need something to do with that money.
Susan talked about China in that interview, and China was another of our recurring themes. But one day in August was when it really came to a head. They called it Black Monday, an acute market and currency crisis. But we had a different take on it, one which suggested this crisis wasn't as acute as it perhaps seemed, that it had in fact been a long time coming. Here's the way we looked at it. Obviously, we are talking about China, Black Monday as it was termed, when a crash on the Chinese market wiped out $2.7 trillion from global stocks. Now, China has spent a total of $200 billion in propping up its currency and stock markets, and it said it would deploy its $547 billion pension fund to start buying up stocks as well. But here's the rub. At first, no money was used buying up stocks, which suggests Beijing has already realized that supporting the markets like this is somewhat futile.
Kong Ching Chuan is struggling to understand what is happening to China's economy. Quan sells eggs at a market in East Beijing. He tells me he invested $20,000, all of his savings, but he remains hopeful about a recovery.
I already put all my savings into the stock market. What I can do now is just wait for the index to come back. I won't buy or sell at this stage, just keep watching it.
Quan's story is now being replicated in many places across China.
When it comes to making investments, the options for most Chinese are pretty limited, property and shares. The problem now, though, is that the prices of both are falling.
A falling stock market, an economy that's slowing. The owner of this restaurant says his takings are half what they were in June, when the stock market began to fall. He says the landlord won't reduce the rent, so he's closing next month.
My business is not doing well, mainly because the stock market is falling. Many companies in this area have gone bankrupt.
It is an anxious time, and not everyone wants to talk. Many people blame foreigners for manipulating China's stock market. This trading room is popular with pensioners who were encouraged by the government to buy shares.
I don't even dare to calculate how much I lost. The market keeps falling. Yesterday I lost 10%, today another 10%. I don't know when this could end.
The stock market is a sensitive issue now, and these people know it. Officials demanded to see our pictures, ordering us to delete several images before they returned our identity cards. When Xi Jinping became president, he unveiled his vision. He called it the China Dream. Loosely defined, it means making China more rich and powerful. Some still believe that will happen.
The China Dream is our goal. That goal will be definitely achieved. If not, our country will go backwards. People's lives are still getting better day by day.
China's leadership has engineered recovery before, and the people it governs still have faith it will do so again.
So what we see there in Adrian's report are the people struggling under this acute market crisis. But remember what we said earlier, markets, and that includes China's, have actually been out of touch with reality for years. So be wary of these headline writers who say this crash was triggered by concerns about China's economy now. Think about it. Commodity prices have been falling since 2011. Currencies in emerging markets have been tumbling for almost 2 years on the prospect of the US raising interest rates. Unemployment's remained high in plenty of countries as well. This is the reality. And then there was Europe, or more specifically Greece, which once again threatened to divide the continent. It was one of those fast-moving, ever-changing stories, the type which just occasionally requires you to take a step back and look at how it reached such a point. That was something I did for Jazeera.com as part of their 1-minute explainer series.
Greece was one of Europe's stars. At one point, its economy grew at around 4.2% each year. Today, the country's a basket case. So what happened and why? In part, Greece has itself to blame. Before 2008, it spent big time on the military, public sector jobs, pensions, and other social benefits. Tax evasion flourished, tax enforcement didn't. And then there was the cost of hosting the 2004 Summer Olympic Games in Athens, about 11 billion euros. But most seriously, Greek politicians had been understating the country's deficit for years. Everything came crashing down after the 2008 financial crisis, when we learned Greece owed a lot of people a lot of money. By 2010, Greece was locked out of financial markets. The only way back in was by borrowing money. But from where? Eurozone countries, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, they call that the Troika these days. They came through with one bailout, and then another. But that money came with strings attached, austerity, which had a devastating impact on the Greek people. They had their salaries cut, they lost their jobs, pensions, healthcare and social services were slashed. Taxes went up, public assets were sold. The measures were supposed to fix the Greek economy. Instead, they made things worse. Today, Greece owes its creditors a total of 320 billion euros. Over the past 5 years, GDP, a measure of a country's growth, has fallen by 25%, while unemployment is now up at 26%. An even scarier number, death by suicide has gone up by 35%. That's how Greece got to where it is today. Where it goes next, that's a lot less clear.
You know, when your show's called Counting the Cost, that often means looking at the human toll. And in putting together this programme, two themes came to mind: refugees and poverty. Now, one of our poverty stories was actually a good news one, and we'll come to that shortly. But there was almost no good news on the refugee front, millions of them trying to make it into Europe, whilst the people smugglers made money off their desperation.
Consider this number. 366,402 refugees have arrived on Europe's shores, and on average, people smugglers are charging $3,000 a person to help them reach Europe. That means a staggering $1.1 billion has been made in an unofficial market, which sadly has huge demand. And just as a comparison, how much has the UN asked for to assist Syrians? $1.5 billion, and they have a shortfall of $341 million for the rest of the year. The point we're making is that there is an awful lot of money being made from vulnerable people out there. And is anything being done about that? And in fact, should anything be done? Because the demand is there and people are obviously willing to pay.
Well, that's true. I think I don't think also that only a law enforcement approach would solve this problem. It's a much broader problem, as I think we are all aware of. What we are focusing on is not to the migrants, not to their situation, but on the organized crime behind those people and targeting those who are responsible for putting lives in danger or also abusing people that are in a very dangerous situation. So it's true, the broader problem will not be solved by law enforcement, but at least I think our task is to make sure that the organized crime doesn't make use of this and earns a lot of money by transporting people in terrible circumstances.
Yeah. There was some good news on the poverty front, though, big picture news, which suggested the tide was starting to turn. You may have heard of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. They were set 15 years ago and pledged to, quote, spare no effort to free men, women and children from the abject and dehumanising conditions of extreme poverty. The good news was that those goals were achieved 5 years ahead of schedule, with 1 billion people lifted out of what is defined as extreme poverty. But of course, there's still huge work to be done. We spoke to Nikhil Seth, the Director for Sustainable Development at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, about the next 15 years.
How much of the success of the goals comes down to just transferring of wealth, if I can call it that, i.e. one country, a wealthier country, giving money to a poorer country? There's nothing wrong with that, of course. It's a great thing if countries will do that. But to me, it doesn't really seem to be sustainable in the end, I would say.
That's a very small part of this agenda. every country, when it looks at its budget, is already covering many of the issues I mentioned on poverty eradication, on health, on education, on gender equality, on protecting the marine ecosystems, on promoting industrialization and growth. These are the bailiwick of most budgets. So what we are doing, of course, is aggregating and saying that this will be a big enterprise. But what we are encouraging the governments to do is to redirect their budget in ways that make irreversible poverty eradication possible.
Can you give me an example of how a government might redirect its wealth, as you put it, to eliminate poverty irreversibly? Because again, that is a very big goal.
Economists are used to looking at these things from a cost-benefit analysis, but the problem in many of these costs and benefits is that they are difficult to monetize and difficult to give a dollar value to. So now we are encouraging policymakers all around the globe to look at issues in their interconnectedness so that they can define sensible policy and help governments, therefore, make a sensible choice of where these investments should be.
We were lucky enough to take Counting the Cost on the road twice this year, and both times it was about aviation. In June, our destination was France, the Paris Air Show. And with a bit of a lull in commercial plane orders, we switched focus to the defence side of things. After all, France is home to Dassault Aviation and its flagship fighter jet, the Rafale. That was our feature piece from Paris.
The Rafale is a French fighter jet. It is used predominantly by the French Air Force. But up until recently, no one else wanted it. Performance-wise, it just didn't stack up against competitors like the Eurofighter or the F-18, even if the boss of the company which makes it thinks otherwise.
The Rafale is a perfect aircraft to be able to match the requirement, whatever it is, air-to-air, air-to-surface, recommission, and I think that this capability to be omni-role is really what has been recognized by our customers.
The sheer number of people who come to see the Rafale at an air show like this is testament to the amount of interest in it. Now, Dassault Aviation spent $45 billion just on developing the Rafale, but that has been money well spent when you consider that Qatar has bought 24 of them, Egypt's bought another 24 of them, India has bought 36 of them, and there is talk of a fourth major deal in the pipeline as well.
Well, it struggled in the beginning, but a lot of these fighter programs do. However, it struggled to gain its first export customer. I mean, for years it languished just a French Air Force and French Navy program. So basically, this year has been extremely good for the airplane because Egypt has ordered 24 and India has also placed an order for 36. Now, the Indian procurement has been running for some time, and I think France would certainly like to sell more aircraft there.
But while the number of new Rafales in the sky is known, just what they're costing those countries is a little less obvious.
We could say probably a modern fighter like this could cost, we see, $80 to $120 million, but it's very difficult to say because the negotiations are very secretive.
So no doubt Rafale has become a popular plane, and Dassault's view is that what's good in the sky is good on the ground for the French and European economies.
I think that really aeronautics in France are really good with the civilian side. This is true with Airbus, for example, but also true with Dassault with Falcon, or with Safran for the engines, or Thales with the avionics, and the military side, which also involve Dassault, Thales, Safran, and I think it's complementary.
And then just last month, it was the Dubai Air Show, our fourth visit there. But as it was in Paris, commercial plane orders were not a big feature, even where the big Gulf carriers were concerned. They'd bought up a record number of planes in Dubai 2 years before, so didn't really need any more just yet. So again, we went in search of something a bit different, and we certainly found that inside the main exhibition hall at the 3D print show. Have a look. It's only when you see 3D printing with your own eyes, you truly appreciate what it is and the potential it has. Just think, you design or scan what you want on a computer, and the printer creates a 3D version of it. The limits, while not endless, have plenty of runway, which is something the aviation sector has realized and harnessed. This is the beginnings of a propeller.
Well, for now, it's definitely only a prototype, but as the technology develops, we will get stiffer and stiffer materials that we can actually print, so extrude and actually use them more and more as real propellers. Maybe not at a passenger aircraft right now, but for prototypes and little drones, it definitely works.
Airbus's newest plane, the A350, has 1,000 parts manufactured through 3D printing. That's work that happens in-house rather than by a third party.
What we're seeing is companies adopt this technology for streamlining their manufacturing. We see companies that we're involved with, such as Airbus, ULA, they're reducing costs and manufacturing times by using 3D printed parts. ULA was able to combine assemblies into single parts to greatly reduce cost and time.
A lot of the focus at the air show was on this, a 3D printed drone, or UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle. It's a concept piece designed more to show what could happen with this sort of technology. But what's significant is the manufacturer, Stratasys, has managed to pack a jet engine inside it. It can fly at up to 240 kilometers per hour and doesn't break apart.
What we're showcasing here is the advancements in the materials that we're using, as well as the machines we're using. The technology today is capable of producing a highly customized UAV that's purpose-built and is capable of high speeds.
And the other key is that this technology is getting cheaper.
The technology is 20 years old, but it hasn't been used much because it was just too expensive. So single machines were up to $1 million to purchase, and then operating costs were very high.
So all told, 3D printing looks like a game changer. In fact, in many ways it already is. But there remains one major loophole.
Of course, file security is a big topic coming up. So who's going to be scanning that part and reproducing it? Who owns that file? Who owns the ideas? So our industry also has some obstacles in front of them, because we need to make sure those files are really secured. If you produce one part, that you can only produce one part. Where it's a little bit like 15, 18 years ago with the music industry. All of a sudden you could get music everywhere. Just imagine you can find those pieces, those parts, all of a sudden all over the internet. That's not going to work. So we need file security combined here. So this is a big, big thing for us.
And if you'll just indulge me for a moment before we go, I would like to show you this one again. Whilst in Dubai, we met the Breitling Wingwalkers, an aerial team who sit atop vintage Boeing biplanes and perform basically acrobatics in the air. It is fantastic to watch, and as I discovered, to take part in as well.
I am very lucky, and sometimes you have to sort of take a step back and realise what you're actually doing, and like being here in Dubai is fantastic, and I never would have thought, many years ago that I would be travelling effectively the world and performing with a vintage biplane from the 1940s. It's just absolutely, you couldn't have planned it.
Doing this at the weekends, it gives me that drive to go and do the job during the week. I can go and, have a normal life and feel very sort of secure, and then I can come and do this and just get my kicks, really. So if you'd like to follow me up.
And then it was time for me to get mine. I was suited up, strapped to the top of the plane, and sent on my way. It's hard to describe what it was like up there. Exhilarating, of course, but oddly calming, soothing, even when Martin took me through an unexpected barrel roll. But sitting up there, it was easy to see how this job wouldn't leave you bored or watching the clock.
And you should know that I actually signed up for this without knowing what it really involved. I thought I was just going to take a quick flight and be done, but apparently there's nothing quite like first-hand experience when reporting on something. Anyway, that is it for our end-of-year Counting the Cost special, but do head online to aljazeera.com/CTC. All 51 of our episodes from this year are up there. If there's something perhaps in this show that you'd like to see again, you can do that at your leisure. And do get in touch with us as well with your comments and suggestions. You can tweet me at KamalAJE, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or just drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. We are back next week with a panel discussion looking ahead to the big economic stories of 2016. And our first fresh show of the year will be on January the 8th. But that is it for 2015. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole Counting the Cost team. Thanks for joining us and Happy New Year. The news on Al Jazeera is next.